Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be on, Elijah. These are very strange times, but exciting and stimulating, even though somewhat depressing and discouraging for the mess that the Western cabal has made that will not be easy to clean up.
Now, I know before we started the interview, you were saying that things just seem, they've turned from surreal to really just super surreal right now. We just saw the inauguration of Trump, so Trump is technically the 45th president, and this just seems, I don't know, it's still hard to wrap my mind around that this actually happened. Can you expand and update your view on what Trump will do as a president?
Well, I think first it's important to look at who Trump is. He's not an ex-governor. He's not an ex-senator. He's not like Obama, who did absolutely nothing in his previous life. Obama didn't have one single piece of legislation while he was a senator attached to his name. He didn't have any one particular movement or anything when he was in the entire Congress. No one remembers anything about him at Columbia University, and he had fake passports, fake Social Security. Okay, Donald Trump is the exact opposite. He's been a public figure for a long time. He's got buildings named after him. He's gone through bankruptcy or two. He's come back. He's not a politician. He doesn't give one rat shit about what his opponents and critics think. Obama is deeply concerned. Bush Jr. was deeply concerned about image. Okay, Trump has his own past. He has his own track record. Okay, I'm not operating on notes here. These are just thoughts. Trump has his own private security team. And if you think he's never confronted a threat before and never confronted a person who attempted to do harm to him or his businesses, you're wrong. He's dealt with many people. He comes from Las Vegas and Atlantic City and New York City. Do you think there's some tough types there? That's one of the reasons Trump is so feared by his opponents, which generally can be described as the banker cabal combined with the neocon fascists, who I prefer to call Nazis. These are reinvigorated Nazis, of the grandchildren of Nazi Germany that slipped into the United States through Operation Paperclip in the late 40s, where perhaps 2,000, not 200, 2,000 Nazis and bankers and scientists and all kinds of people slipped through to become fascist America in a fledgling sense. Trump is their opponent. Trump doesn't care that people might oppose him or his views. He has an attitude of, well, that's fine. Go do something about it if you don't like what I'm doing. Trump has a tremendous task ahead of him to clean up more than one generation of muck. Now, a lot of people say, well, when did all this stuff start, Jim? When did the big disaster? When did it all begin? All right, I don't want to go back, to Adam and Eve or say the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. How about if we just start at the severe economic damage that was dealt out in 1984 with the outsourcing movement? And Jack Ma gave a surprising speech. I'm surprised that he was even there at Davos this week. But he gave a speech that pointed to how the United States government spending in the last 30 years has been $15 trillion in military, hardware, consulting, weapons design, failed weapons. I mean, the F-22 is a joke. We're forcing our allies to buy it. Gosh, what a ridiculous finale that is. So Jack Ma of Alibaba said, what are you doing with $15 trillion of bad spending? What have you gotten from it? And he doesn't want to answer the question. I'll try. We've gotten pretty much a wrecked U.S. financial system. We've gotten a wrecked international geopolitical situation with respect to the U.S. In other words, the U.S. has alienated all of its allies and attacked all of its enemies. What Jack Ma overlooked, and I thought it was kind of an interesting oversight, he didn't mention outsourcing. He should have said, well, what are you idiots doing since 1984, outsourcing your industry? What smart country exports its industry? The answer is none. So we've been doing something stupid at a micro level. It started with Intel moving its chip fabrication plants to the Pacific Rim, 1984. I was at Digital Equipment Corporation, and our guys all stood around thinking, what on earth could come from this that's good? None, nothing, zero. Okay, then it was all kinds of other industries that went international and outsourced. We were told, remember what we were told in the 80s and 90s? Low-cost solution, cheaper labor, cheaper consumer spending costs for Americans. The whole theme of the U.S. becoming a consumer economy is suicidal. We ended up borrowing against our homes to continue and propagate our consumerism. We got the foreclosure movement after that. But we also got Black Monday in 1987. That was a consequence of outsourcing and its stupidity. And how did we recover from outsourcing through the 80s and Black Monday's disaster of 87? We created the banking derivatives for a false, phony foundation to the Western and U.S. banking system. Okay, it's all crumbled. What have we done? Trump must reverse bad spending militarily and the outsourcing movement. He must reverse it all. And I think the big challenge that he's going to have is that he won't have enough time. He'll have to start the process and be the boogeyman, and lots of crises are going to be on his watch, and he's going to be blamed like all the morons in the U.S. population have done in the previous several administrations. Blame the current problems on the current president and not his predecessors. We've had 24 years of disastrous economic and financial policies from Clinton, Baby Bush, and Obama, and it's going to be blamed on Trump because most Americans, 90% of them, are absolute morons. Trump's going to have a tough time. Trump had to first win the presidency. That meant he had to stop the voting fraud. That meant he had to stop any kind of physical threat against him. It meant that he had to create coalitions. And I think what he's done is he's made two deals with the devils. He had to make a deal with the bankers of Wall Street, mainly Goldman Sachs. He had to make deals with the military, so he had to find white hats in both the Pentagon and Langley. By white hats, I mean good side, good people, good-natured, good motive, who believe in the Constitution and do not follow the narco trend. The last three presidents have all three been narcotics addicts. Clinton, Bush Jr., and Obama, all three are cocaine addicts who permitted the furthering entrenchment and establishment of the narco financing, the narco organizations like Afghanistan. $800 billion of profit every year from Afghanistan in a vertically integrated heroin industry with chemical trucks moving through. Okay, you've seen the movies of the crazy guys with their pants rolled up and they're stamping the big vats full of poppy to produce the white paste, which is dried to make the white powder, which is cocaine. Okay, you've seen all them. We turn that into an industry with trucks and chemical processing. There are 30 times as many military and heroin contractors in Afghanistan than there are military soldiers holding a rifle. 30 to 1. Okay, Trump has to reverse all this. And the deals that he made with the banking and military devils, okay, not all military people are devils, but what they do is devilish in the sense that dropping bombs and spreading bullets and knocking out bridges is not constructive to the economy. We've got our fake news, we've got our fake dollar, but we've also got our fake economics that's taught us for 20 years that war is good business. People are employed by weapons fabrication companies, arms merchants. Well, yeah, but where's the benefit to the economy? Oh, but then we're told the second corollary lie to this whole theme, well, you got to rebuild. Okay, so let's destroy our economy so we can rebuild it and it'd be good for jobs? What kind of lunacy is this? This is what I call Reich economics. The fascist business model ruining the news, the politics, the banking, and the economy. Fascism wrecks everything in the country, and since 9/11, we have been 100% fascists. And the culmination recently has been fake news laws, where the only news that can be called legitimate will be fake. And all the real news is going to be called propaganda. Okay, this is turning news on its head, and I hope Trump works step by step to shut CNN down. Okay, those are just some thoughts. Trump is not to be trifled with. He surrounds himself with smart people, no-nonsense people, people he can trust, and people who are not beholden to the system. He's the first president that I can ever remember who didn't have a vested interest and lots of different hooks in his backside. Maybe Eisenhower was the last. I don't know. Eisenhower was my first president. Oh, my gosh. I was 6, 7 years old, and Eisenhower was president. Kennedy was the first election that I really followed as a kid. And, I was 8 years old. Anyway, we got a lot of topics here, but Trump is a very big issue. He's a unique person. He may not have a big entourage of Secret Service. He might use his own. He's made a joke that he needs some time to fumigate the White House. And some of the interior conversations have indicated, well, there's been a lot of gay sex parties in there for a long time, and he needs to clean the place up. He also needs to remove all the different Islamic curtains and replace the Islamic symbols with Christian symbols. Very few people remember, but in 2008, when Obama was campaigning, he passed himself off as a Christian. He has been the biggest fraud in the history of the U.S. government. And Trump is the opposite. Therefore, it was a big shock for people. Who is he? He's what you see. What does he want to do? What's his agenda? It's what he's been saying. How's he going to do it? With great difficulty, because for 30 years we've screwed up and practically ruined the U.S. financial and economic system. We've got inadequate industry. And I think the big risks immediately in the first year are going to be sabotage of Trump, which will be very easy for the fascist banker cabal to do. Very easy. They could organize an international boycott of the dollar in trade payment. They could pull back on QE, the hyper monetary inflation, the bond purchasing. They could cut that back. So either at the low level or the upper level, they could screw up Trump and put him on crisis watch and crisis management in a matter of a month. So let's watch to see what happens. All right, let's try to move to the next topic unless there's a follow-up about something specific regarding Trump.
There are many follow-ups regarding Trump, but one that I thought we could touch on quickly is from Jason, and he's wondering if you think that Trump will default or otherwise try to manage the national debt, and what do you think will happen to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid under Trump?
Well, I believe the U.S. government debt has already been defaulted on. And I know that might sound a little funny to people because they haven't seen it in the news. But if they're going to default on $18 trillion a couple of years ago, $17 trillion, I don't think the architects of the destruction are going to want you to know about what they did. So they're going to keep it quiet. I think we've had a quiet default on our debt, and the default took place about 2 or 3 years ago. So the question might be transformed into, is it possible the default is going to become known and a publicly discussed and open topic for its resolution, restructure, and follow-on remedy? And I think the answer is very much yes. Yeah, very much yes. Here's one of the reasons why I think we've already defaulted. 2 reasons. I think it was 2014 we started reading that there's no more debate in Congress on raising the debt limit. And they pretty much told us that the debt limit wasn't relevant anymore. Well, why is it not relevant? Because we defaulted. The second thing was an actual event where a complex series of events took place involving J.P. Morgan and the sale for a very low price, heavily discounted, the J.P. Morgan bank headquarters and office complex that included their gold vault and a conference center. I think that was part of a debt default and asset seizure by the creditors, namely China, and I think it was integrated in a very complex manner with the leasing in the year 2000 of a colossal amount of gold by the United States with China. And we defaulted on that too, because, well, you can't say we stole leased gold. We improperly used the leased gold. Remember, China got most favored nation status in 1999, Eli. Did we just do that out of the goodness of our hearts? No, we made a deal. We said, we'll give you most favored nation status. We'll give you a lot of foreign direct investment for industrial development. We'll bring to a climax our stupidity with the outsourced industry. But in return, we want something too. We want a bunch of your gold. So I think somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 tons were leased to the United States, so the United States could continue to dump gold and support the dollar for several more years. That's what we do. It's the Rubin doctrine. Buy a few more years, even if it's still a guaranteed ruin. But the Chinese, not being stupid, decided, well, we want some collateral on this gold, so they attached the J.P. Morgan headquarters. They attached the number one banking center property in all the United States. They went for the elite number one property, and now the Chinese own it. And I don't know 3 common Americans who've ever asked me, why do the Chinese take the J.P. Morgan headquarter building. What's that all about? People just don't ask good questions. They don't think. Hat Trick let our subscribers do, because we talk about this stuff all the time. So I think there will be a default. Social Security is, well, it's, you know, Social Security is a bit of a joke. I'm actually going to turn 65 this May, and I got some decisions to make. And I've actually made one of them a few months ago. I decided I'm gonna wait till I turn 65 and get a little bit better benefit. Doesn't really hurt waiting another 6 or 8 months. Big deal. It's not going to be a lot anyway. But what have they done with Social Security payments in the last 20 years since the Clinton administration? They've dumbed down all the calculation, and they've made sure that the rise in Social Security payments has absolutely nothing to do with the cost of living in our reality. They've tied it in with the Consumer Price Index, which is tied with government pensions and all kinds of different things like that. The CPI is running at 2.5%, 1.9%, whatever. And the actual inflation is like 7, 8, 9% every single year. And they tried to torpedo the oil price in order to keep the CPI down, the second motive of trying to harm Russia. So they've done some various things to try to do. Anyway, Social Security is broken. So if the question is, will Social Security fail under the Trump administration? No. It failed under the Clinton and Bush II administrations. So are we going to get maybe a cancellation of obligations with respect to Social Security? Possibly later, and maybe not in too many more years from now. I don't know. Medicare? Medicare is one of the biggest jokes in the world. The Medicare costs are bigger than the Pentagon budget. That's how big that is now. Medicare is ridiculous. Medicare is the single most responsible factor. Now, how do I want to say it? Is the biggest factor and most responsible element to the increase in U.S.-based health costs. I got a quick example of this. Back in the year 2003, my mother had a knee problem. She never had a torn ACL or anything like that. She just had a wear down of the cartilage. So she went to the doctor. I told her, Mom, why don't you try these MSM chondroitin complex pills? They're good. They make kind of a natural grease and lubricant around your joints so that you don't have the bone on bone and all those things that trigger arthritis. And she said, oh, I think I'm going to go to my doctor. Okay, fine. And my dad fully endorsed going to the doctor. They recommended Synvisc, Synvisc, at a cost of $1,600 for an injection. And I said, Mom, that's ridiculous. $1,600, what are they going to do? They're going to buy you a month? And she said, no, they actually say that it's going to be good for 3 or 4 months, an effective result. I said, $1,600 for 3 or 4 months? That's absurd. And my father piped in, yes, but it's covered by Medicare. And I said, well, what about its effectiveness? Does that matter? And he said, Jim, let's just see what happens. All right, my mother, in 1 month, pretty much like I said, in 1 month, the effect wore off. And I said, Mom, try MSM chondroitin pills. It costs $8 for a bottle. If you take 3 a day, I don't think you'll quite use up the bottle in 1 month. So $8 for 1 month versus $1,600 for your month. Which do you think makes more sense? Because MSM chondroitin has worked for me for 10 years, since my knee surgery in '93. And she said, well, I think I'll give it a try. I'll give it a try. I don't want another injection because it was kind of painful. Okay, so effectiveness wasn't her main motive. It was pain of injection. In 3 days, she said, Jim, it's amazing. I can walk. I can go down steps. It's amazing. Can you buy me 5 more bottles? And I said, sure, I'll buy you 10. And I said to my father, but Dad, the $8 is not covered by Medicare. I'm very sassy with most everybody. I've got a hair across my ass with almost everybody. My father finds me very annoying. And I said, Dad, do you find it interesting that even though I'm annoying, I tend to have good arguments and have a good track record for what's working and what doesn't work? And he said, yeah, okay. All right, fine, Jim. All right, so I think the debt is going to be a wreck. I think Social Security is not going to continue. I think Medicare has to be shut down. So that's my answer.
Now, a couple of viewers are wanting to know about the U.S.'s relationship with China under a Trump administration. This viewer is wanting to know, do you think a trade war is inevitable with China, or has it already begun? And if so, who do you think will hold the upper hand and why?
Well, back in 2002 and 3 and 4, when the $23 billion in foreign direct investment from the U.S. and Canadian companies went into China, I made a call, and I continued the call in the first year, 2004, for the hat-trick letter. I said China is going to be a commercial ally, then a commercial rival, and then a trade war opponent. And it won't take more than a few years to become a trade war opponent. We've been a trade war opponent with China, I think, since Lehman Brothers. That was a pretty good line in the calendar to be drawn. And, you know, this is going to be a little bit difficult for some people to swallow. But China had a hidden hand in the Lehman Brothers event. Right around that time, in 2007, we defaulted, we reneged on the gold lease with China that was related to the 1999 most favored nation status. You take a look at some of the records for Fannie Mae, and you see in 2006 and 2007 a great acceleration in the dumping by China of mortgage bonds. The Wall Street crew, who likes to write history in their own selfish way, their own self-aggrandizing way, in their own convenient shade toward perspective of their role, they never mention that China was dumping Fannie Mae bonds right before the Lehman Brothers incident. I think that was the beginning of the trade war with China, and it was motivated by our default renege on the gold and silver leasing. They call it the Mao Zedong era gold. China has a lot of gold. They've got 30,000 tons of gold. Don't listen to any of their nonsense in the press about how China's up to 1,000 tons. Wow, yeah, really. Just do some simple calculations on the back of a stupid napkin and you get over 25,000 tons. I mean, we're just full of stupidity. The trade war is in full blossom. Let me tell you a quick story, because we're trying to promote friction with China, and we're trying to get some friction between China and Japan. I've got a client, just call him Jerry. Jerry lives in Hong Kong. Jerry lives in a building with a lot of other people, and the building has a doorman. And Jerry was talking to the doorman about a year ago, 10 months ago. It was a while back. And the doorman said to Jerry, you know, something very interesting has been happening recently. My son just got a very strange job, and he's being paid by an organization that I'm quite sure is part of the U.S. government. It's an NGO. He's paid $100 a day to carry a placard and go out and demonstrate and yell slogans regarding the South China Sea Islands. We're paying people to promote the friction. I mean, this is as direct as you can get with respect to the hat-trick letter in my work. A client's doorman's son is hired. Okay, we're doing lots of things like that, you know, like Black Lives Matter, stuff like that. Those are the Soros NGOs. and other Soros NGOs are paying for passage for the Arab human garbage to come into Europe and fracture that society with some considerable success. Okay, so this China issue, it's very interesting. I like to point to two different events in just the last week. Alibaba's CEO, Jack Ma, had a private meeting with Trump. And then 3 or 4 days later, he was a speaker at the Davos Economic Forum, where Ma mentioned our wasted $15 trillion in military spending. So, do you think maybe Trump and Ma made an agreement to have the $15 trillion wasted military spending as a primary theme in his message at Davos so that Trump would not have to mention it himself? This is how smart Trump is. Another example of how Trump has done some things that will gather momentum without his name being immediately on it. Trump has assigned a task force, and I don't know in what form it's going to take, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to be in charge of the vaccine project. The vaccine project is going to study the risks of vaccine usage and administration in the United States, and they're going to bring in experts. So once again, Trump is not coming out and saying there are lots of really nasty toxic ingredients in vaccines like mercury and formaldehyde. By the way, vaccines contain 70 times as much mercury as what is declared toxic waste in the vaccines. So Trump is not going to go out and say, well, we've got, cancer-causing agents in vaccines. We've got immune debilitation deficiency agents in the vaccines. We've got mercury and formaldehyde in the vaccine. He doesn't have to do that. He's set up a group, and the experts are going to do it. So what he does is he starts things in motion that can't be stopped or will not be stopped or will be heavily supported when they gather the momentum, and it doesn't have a quote. Trump has never said vaccines are furthering the cancer rate. Other experts are going to say that. So I think when it comes to China, all this talk about, oh gosh, there's going to be a big trade war with China. Where the hell have you been? And then this questioner understands that I think he hinted that we were already in a trade war with China, and I fully agree with that. We got all kinds of different things. Apple is involved. Google is involved. The trade war is blossoming with China. And let me just say something that I tell Latinos here all the time, including last night in a conversation with someone. The United States has given away its industry, and Trump wants to bring it back. So the locations of American industry, the countries, are going to object and say that Trump is very destructive and very disruptive and trying to cause problems. No, he's trying to save the U.S. economy by restoring its own industry. No smart country ever sends its industry to other lands. We have, very good examples of successful economies, and I like pointing to Germany. Germany had some real gut-wrenching in the 1990s and in the following decade, where they made deals with their labor unions. We're going to cut your benefits, not a lot, and we're going to cut your wages, not a lot, like 15%, and we're going to preserve the jobs in Germany. Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis and Porsches are not made in Asia. They're made in Germany. Ford, Chrysler, General Motors have lots and lots of components made in Asia. The engines for Chrysler are predominantly Mitsubishi. Okay, so U.S. sold out. Trump wants to reverse the outsource trend. and he's going to step on a lot of toes. The Mexicans are really angry, not so much about the wall. The wall is one of the silliest arguments, but it's a focal point. The Mexicans are upset that Trump is going to attempt to bring back a lot of the U.S. automaking, truck-making facilities, all that industry. It's gone to Mexico and has really helped their economy, and bring it back to the United States. If it's really helped the Mexican economy, it really hurt the U.S. economy. I mean, GM just announced a shutdown of thousands of jobs. GM. On the day of the inauguration. I think that was not an accident. They're making a point. The U.S. government actually gives tax incentives to American companies that move their headquarters out of the United States. What kind of stupid policy have we had for the last 30 years? This is what Trump has to reverse. And it's not going to be easy, and he's going to piss off a lot of countries. And his attitude is, so what? If you're angry, then be angry. We need to work together because the U.S. economy has been destroyed. And we need to rebuild it. And I think one of the quintessential focal points for the battle that Trump's going to have is his $1 trillion infrastructure project. He's going to need to increase the U.S. debt $1 trillion. So he cannot have a cutoff of credit in his first term or his first year. So he must make a deal to extend the toxic dollar and its reign of terror. That's a real point of conflict. Let's see how it works out. And I think because of that conflict, because of that reality and need to continue something that's broken in order to have the basic investment in the U.S. economy, he had to make a deal with Goldman Sachs. And the deal probably is really simple. We'll bring in Goldman Sachs. We'll continue certain systems. We won't go after you for fraud. And we'll try to continue this a little while longer just so we can get some momentum in rebuilding the U.S. industry. This is what I think is happening. And I'm not really bothered, but I am a little bothered. I'm not big time bothered that he's got some Goldman Sachs people in there. I think these are Goldman Sachs people who are on the fringe. Okay, you can always say once Goldman Sachs, always Goldman Sachs in their loyalty. But I don't think it's that simple. I think some of these guys like Mnuchin, if he's going to be made the Treasury Secretary, and we're going to find out real soon if these are final, I think he's probably going to have a very tough mission of continuing some of the dollar toxic programs to sustain things, because we need the $1 trillion investment in infrastructure project. I mean, infrastructure is just the beginning of the Trump reconstruction. The next phase is forming businesses. I mean, big deal if you got good rail facility, good bridges and electricity centers. Okay, big deal. What are you going to do with it? Well, I'd like to see a movement and a mission for Trump to say we need 20,000 new companies formed every year, maybe 30,000, maybe more, every year, so we can start to rebuild the United States and start to export more and reduce our $550 billion annual trade deficit. Because we're not getting any remedy unless we reduce that trade deficit. So that's my long answer. Sorry, these are long answers, but these are very important topics and good questions, Elijah.
All right. Well, I'd like to move our focus off of Trump and to Europe right now. Now, another thing we saw in 2016 that really surprised a lot of the mainstream was Brexit. Now, this viewer is wanting to know if you think Brexit will be betrayed by the traitors in Parliament. So do you think Brexit will... It got voted on. The people in Britain want to leave the EU. But do you think that'll actually happen?
Yes, I think it'll happen. They've got a prime minister named May, a woman, and I think she's going to continue it, make sure that it happens. I think all hell would break loose in London and rioting would take place if they betrayed the vote of the people. I mean, the people are usually betrayed upon, but this one is in full view on the table. I think it'll proceed. You know, let me just make a link. I know we're trying to move away from Trump. Brexit was, in a sense, a movement away from elite control of Britain. Britain decided we don't want to have our export rules and other rules dictated by Brussels EU Commission fascist dictators. I know that sounds a little weird, but take a look at the EU Commission. They're not elected, and they hand down orders to countries. That's dictatorship. Trump is Brexit times, I think, 10 in importance. The Trump election, the Trump administration, will be Brexit times 10 in its impact. We're trying to break away from elite control of the money, of the corporate outsourcing, of the constant war that I make a major theme in my work. Constant war is required in the United States. Creating new enemies is required in the United States. Furthering the hundreds of billions of wasted dollars into military spending is a requirement in the United States. Creating smoke screens for our heroin business in other countries is a requirement for the United States. Okay, this is what Trump is going to smash or attempt to. And he might put his life at risk. I like to say that Trump has three ally camps that helped him to get the election and who will appear in his cabinet. But there are 10 out there. So 7 very powerful camps are not his allies. And he needs to erode their power base in order to proceed. And a lot of their power base has been eroded. The whole theme of Davos and the economic forum. You know, I love the topic of Davos. How many economists are at the Davos Economic Forum? What, 3? How many bankers are at the Davos Economic Forum? Maybe 100? Why don't they call it the Davos Bankers Forum? What's economic about the Davos Economic Forum? Not much. You want to point to an economic forum? Point to last year's St. Petersburg Economic Forum. There were hundreds of CEOs there cutting deals. How many economic deals are being cut at the Davos Economic Forum? None. Why is it an economic forum? It's not. It's a central bank forum that likes to give you, the sleepy, dopey masses, a false name that you can run with. Oh, we have an economic forum. It's Davos. Yeah, but there aren't many CEOs there. There aren't any economic deals cut. And it's all bankers having a barbecue with $30 hot dogs. Oh, my gosh. So, got some interesting things happening. And, Brexit is important for Britain. Brexit might have another motive at work that we're not really told much about, and that is that Britain wants to make sure they have a very key role as the Eurasian trade zone comes into being, and they want that role to ensure the London financial center, that it flourishes. And they couldn't do that under the fascist dictatorship wing of Brussels and the EU Commission. So they needed to declare their independence so they could move to the next chapter where the inevitable Eurasian trade zone will come, and Britain is going to fight like hell to have a strong RMB trading hub for selling bonds in the Chinese currency and trading in their currency. That's what an RMB hub does. There's no hub in the United States yet. They've got a hub in Toronto that's forming. They've got a little office in ICBC Bank in Los Angeles, California. But the big battle is going to be between London and Frankfurt, Germany. So Brexit might have had some other motives involved that we're not told about. And just so you understand that the elite are directing some of these things, the Rothschild family made over $1 billion in profit from trading, anticipating the decline of the British pound currency following the Brexit vote. So do you think maybe the Rothschilds allowed the Brexit to happen? Well, yeah, they profited from it. They knew it was going to happen. They didn't stop it. They encouraged it a little bit. And they put out some false stories that the elite didn't like it. Well, really? I think the elite have some plans for London in the next chapter with the Eurasian trade zone and maybe even with a gold-based currency system. So the Brexit is important. The U.S. Brexit, the Trump exit. The Trump exit is 10 times more important. So let's move on.
This viewer is wanting to know about, basically, if you could give an update on what your sources are telling you about the implementation of, first, a gold trade note, and also, second, the Nordic euro.
Okay, the gold trade note has been a topic of conversation, not exactly dispute, but some good-natured debate among my colleagues. I think we're starting to see the beginnings of the gold trade note right now. And here's how. The Russians sell China. I don't have this all mapped out in my head, but here's some rough thoughts. The Chinese buy Russian oil. They pay in RMB. And the Russians have set up all kinds of big swaps for trading RMB currency for gold. We all know about tremendous volumes of gold being purchased by China. Well, we don't all. People who have any idea what the hell's going on, they know about it and don't pay attention to the IMF public central bank figures on gold ownership. That's one of the biggest jokes around. That belongs on bathroom walls. The Chinese are buying a lot of gold, but I believe much of that gold is being bought by Russia because they're selling oil to China and natural gas. And China is doing some infrastructure projects like, building oil pipelines and building LNG facilities, things like that, with Russian names on them. Okay, so the Russians are receiving RMB, and the Russians, I think, have set up very large swaps of RMB for gold. And I don't have the figures behind these contracts, but this triangle points to the formation of a gold trade note. I had a conversation with The Voice about a month ago, 3.5, 4 weeks ago, and it was a direct question about evidence and installation and examples of the gold trade note. Where is it now? What's the progress in this structural formation? And he said, he didn't give me a lot of specifics, but what he said was, there's been a lot of progress in the background. These are formations and contracts being created in the background, and they are now at work to some extent. He said, I don't have volume figures for you, but they're at work to some extent right now in handling trade payments and the guarantee for trade payments. In other words, the treasury bills are not used anymore. Other structural elements and contracts are being used, and this group of structural contracts will form the basis as it evolves into the gold trade note. And I was busy with a number of other things, and I said, okay, we'll have to continue this conversation, and thank you very much. And then another colleague pointed out the triangle of China buying Russian oil, the Russians setting up RMB swaps with gold, and there you've got a triangle again. There's been another very important triangle that has been evident in the last several years, and that was Iran selling oil to India, India buying Turkish gold, and Turkey delivering the gold to the Iranian banks. That was called the oil gold trade. Okay, well, that is a gold trade note in a bigger sense. So the Iran-India deal with Turkey was, I believe, an icebreaker for the gold trade note more in a macro sense. And I don't think Iran set up a bunch of swap contracts to formalize the structure, because that structure would become the gold trade note. But I think China and Russia are doing precisely that, because I believe, this is my contention, supported by The Voice, that the Russians and Chinese will further this contractual structure so that it could be used on a much wider basis, not just in energy sales. And it'll become the gold trade note. And if you're looking for a precedent of that, look no further than the petrodollar. Back in the 70s, we arranged that all Saudi oil, and therefore OPEC oil, would be sold and paid in dollars, treasury bills. And their surpluses would remain in the dollar in the form of treasury bills. I don't want to get into a long discussion of petrodollar. I'm trying to relate it to the gold trade note. So the whole structure of selling oil in treasury bills and saving the surplus in treasury bonds was established in the petrodollar. I think it's going to be somewhat copied with the gold trade note with Chinese and Russian oil sales and natural gas sales, LNG. So it's early, and The Voice made a comment about a week ago. He said, you're going to see much more this year, because we were talking about what are we going to see in 2017, what do you expect, and he made a number of comments about Trump, and they appear in the January report that's coming out next week. It's a little bit late in the release. It's going to come out Tuesday or Wednesday next week, and that'll be the 24th and 25th of the month. I just had to wait because there are so many things frozen. But anyway, back to the gold trade note. He said you're going to expect to see some things happening with the gold trade note this year. You're going to see more news about it. You're going to see more developments about it and more details about its structural elements and who's using it and what the volumes are. Because the whole world is going to be moving away from the dollar in two senses. Global currency reserves, which means treasury bonds used as bank assets to forming the reserve foundation of entire national banking systems. Okay, that's going to gradually move away. I mean, we got $400 billion worth of treasury bonds sold in the last 12 months by foreign central banks. This movement is well along. Okay, the other side that's going to change with respect to the dollar is usage as trade payment. And oil is very important. Okay, oil was important in the petrodollar. It was the core. I think oil is going to be important in forming, what do you call it, in the development and evolution of the gold trade note. Very interesting time. And remember, Iran's gold payments were also about oil. Okay, oil is the primary commercial item sold, whose payments dictate for lots of other types of payments in commerce, global commerce. Okay, let's move on.
All right, now I'd like to discuss a little bit about the euro. Now, S. Buchanan is wanting to know, why is the euro staying strong when the ECB is doing 80 billion euro QE a month?
Well, the euro's strong versus what? The dollar? So does that mean the euro's doing less QE than the Fed? Is it that simple? The Fed is doing hundreds of billions a month in QE. They don't tell you what they're doing. They tell you they're doing 40 billion a month. Okay, the Euro Central Bank announced what they're doing, and they probably lie also. So my point is, if the euro is rising, most likely the euro is printing less money but enormous volumes than the Fed. They're racing down the chasm. Some people call it a race down the toilet. Okay, so the euro's moving. The turd that's called the euro is swirling in the toilet at a lower rate down the tube, down the gurgle, than the dollar. Next question. That's how important I consider this concept. Next question.
All right, and still on the topic of the euro, this viewer is wanting to know if the EU collapses, what will happen to the euro currency itself?
Well, I think it'll be simultaneous with the dollar and the U.S. government debt default. Whatever happens with the U.S. is going to happen with the EU. The EU fracturing is well along. So what's going to happen with the euro? I don't know exactly. I think there's going to be a big movement to get out of the euro. Italy is going to be moving to exit the euro, and this is not a simple concept. And I have to admit, I've made it sound a bit simple in previous interviews that the Italians are going to have to get out of the euro in order to stimulate their economy and devalue their lira, which they adopt over again. They return to the lira currency. If Italy leaves the euro, that'll be the end of the euro. That's what I'm beginning to conclude. Any country that leaves the euro within the EU, the euro currency, will result in the entire euro fracturing. And that could bring about the launch of the Nordic euro. Look at it this way. You've got Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and maybe one or two other countries that are not dead, insolvent, broken financial elements of the EU. When the EU fractures, that healthy core is going to continue, and they'll continue in the form of the Nordic euro. I made a forecast back in, I think, 2011 that the Nordic euro would come about with a core of Germany and Netherlands. And some people have said, well, that's a wrong forecast. And the voice says, no, it just hasn't happened yet. It takes a while. I mean, when you make a forecast, how much time do you get before it's declared correct or wrong? Many dumbass critics of mine imply that you've got a couple weeks. Oh, Jim, that's a wrong forecast. You said that 2 weeks ago. Well, it hasn't happened yet, you idiot. Things take time. Oh, yeah, but you said that 2 weeks ago. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, they don't even understand the argument. It's like talking to a wall. I have discussions that are really quite comical with my father about forecasts. And he doesn't know what a forecast is. How can you argue on a correct forecast with a person who doesn't know what a forecast is? He said, Jim, you said 2 years ago Papa Bush might be dead. That was a wrong forecast. I said, Dad, it was an observation, it wasn't a forecast. And I said might, and you repeated the word might, so where's the forecast? Yeah, but you said he might be dead. That's the wrong forecast. You can't even discuss these things with uneducated people in economics and finance. So I know that's kind of a roundabout answer, but let's move on. We got a lot of things here.
Now, I'd like to change gears here to the Middle East. This viewer is wanting to know what your forecast for 2017 is for Middle East countries, especially Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
This will be the year, I think, that we see a number of fallen oil monarchies in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia is really struggling not to just come apart at the seams. Saudi Arabia is a mess. Saudi Arabia is pretty much a dead entity. And look at their war with Yemen, not as a profitable venture, a good idea, a wise expansion move of allying with their neighbor. No, look at it as a rape event where they go in there and bomb civilian targets and rape that economy to steal its oil reserves. You never hear the words oil reserves in the Yemen-Saudi conflict. You hear sectarian conflict. Right, that's propaganda nonsense. The low oil price has combined with heavy costs to finance both the Yemen war and the ISIS rebels to create a kill zone for the Arab oil monarchies. I think it was Qatar removed a couple $2 billion from Deutsche Bank. They're bringing money home. The Clintons stole $1.6 billion from the Clinton Foundation and parked it in Qatar. What they were basically doing there is providing a zone for their escape should ever they become prosecuted for treason and high crimes and misdemeanors. The UAE is an interesting story. I have a number of sketchy stories, but it seems the UAE sheiks are now conspiring with a couple of British consulting firms to falsify documents and contracts in order to steal a lot of assets. And this is not starting, it's in its second phase. So UAE is in deep, deep trouble economically. Their two main centers are Abu Dhabi and Dubai. UAE is a very quiet, heavy contributor to ISIS. So are the Saudis, but UAE, I believe, is bigger in their financial support. The Saudis provide arms and men, soldiers. I hate calling the guerrillas soldiers. They're basically killers. And here's just a really weird item. I'm going to throw it out there, and I don't really care about any flack or any comments that come back saying, Jim, you're crazy. When they recruit in the Arab world for ISIS guerrillas, they basically say, we're going to have you go out there and kill in the name of Islam, but you'll also be permitted to rape women. It's one of their recruiting methods in the Arab world for ISIS guerrillas. And rape women they do with license, no prosecution. Thousands of examples, not in the U.S. press. U.S. press is not press, it's propaganda and public opinion shaping. So the finances are going to bring down the Arab oil monarchies. This is not a new event. This is not a middle stage event. This is a late stage event. The Saudis are having tremendous problems. You see it in their real currency forward rates, which I've written about in recent months for the hat-trick letter. They're having problems in some sovereign bond issuances that aren't going real well. They're running out of money, and they lie to us that they've got huge oil reserves. They don't. Their oil reserves are targeted in Yemen, their neighbor. And, most Americans, they have trouble with the map. It's pretty sad. They couldn't locate Vietnam or Luxembourg to save their souls on a globe. But hat-trick letter subscribers can, because they're the smart bunch. But Yemen is on the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula. So you think if there was a lot of oil in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, that there might be a lot of oil in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula? Well, it's hardly ever in the news that Yemen is loaded with oil reserves. And I think that is the first, second, and third motives for the Yemen war. And where does Saudi find all the weapons? Where do they buy them to supply ISIS? The U.S. military-industrial complex. So ISIS has its weapons from the U.S. by way of the Saudi ports. This is all very dirty. And Trump is going to have to expose this, and he's got to use the same clever methods of starting a revelation process so that others make the statements. And you won't have the quote coming out of Trump's mouth that we're arming ISIS. Well, the Israeli Mossad is running ISIS. And one of the offices that they're using is the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey. I mean, people really need to wake up what's going on. We created